Hi, I'm Drew Hutchison. You're attuned to Local Bias. We come to you from the studio at Greenfield Community Television at 393 Main Street in Greenfield, Massachusetts. The topics that we cover are germane to Western Massachusetts. We're no longer just seen in Greenfield. And of course, one of the biggest topics that affects all of us is the river that runs through our backyards. And I'm talking about the Connecticut River. Today with me is environmental journalist Karl Meyer. Karl, welcome to the program once
Drew?
again.
Yeah, pleasure.
We've been talking for about 10 years about this issue.
Isn't that a little bit too long?
Well, I mean, I like seeing you, but come on now, right? So what I want to know is, I thought this was supposed to have been taken care of already. Why are we still here? Why are we still having this conversation?
It's a terrific question. Federal bureaucracy, lack of initiative, climate emergency doesn't seem to be a big deal. We started this process almost exactly 10 years ago for the relicensing of Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Station, Cabot Station on the Turners Falls Power Canal, and Station 1. It was supposed to be a 5-year process. The license for what is called First Light Power, who are owned by now, the newest owner came in 2016, Public Sector Pension Investments, a global, massive venture capital firm with offices in London and Ottawa. They came in and took it over, and right in the middle of relicensing. As a matter of fact, right before their license expired, they actually re-registered all of those plants as limited liability corporations in the state of Delaware. So they ran away with all the Commonwealth's tax assessments that we would have gotten from those plants. And the license expired on April 30th, 2018. And the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission just keeps extending it and extending it. And pretty much Canadian venture capital outfit has been running the show and sort of making fools of a river that is been in miserable shape for the last 50 years since Northfield Mountain hit the ground, powered by Vermont Yankee beginning in 1972. 50 years of the most horrific backward river-sucking machinery ever placed on the Connecticut River. It's the deadliest machine ever installed, and I believe it was illegal from the day it hit the ground. It was illegal by 100 years, according to a federal landmark decision based on the Connecticut River, Holyoke Company versus Lyman. Owners and operators of facilities and dams on the Connecticut River and all U.S. rivers. This was a landmark decision. By right, need to safely pass migratory fish and resident species upstream and down safely. And Northfield came in 5 years after the federal Restoration Pact for 4 New England states and National U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service hit the ground to restore the Connecticut River's migratory fish. There were already American shad eggs implanted upstream of Northfield Mountain. Northfield Mountain chews through everything it sucks up in massive gulps all the time, day in and day out.
So it's going against the Endangered Species Act, for one thing? I mean,
Northfield's impacts, secondary impacts, because they depend, their money is made in this sort of shell scheme where they suck the river up to this 4 billion gallon reservoir at 15,000 cubic feet per second, which is about the equivalent of 7 3-bedroom homes per second, every second for minutes and hours on end, and all the aquatic life in them, and everything that's sucked up there is scientifically considered functionally extirpated. So that is juvenile and adult fish, eggs, and larvae. So it does that, but it also, when Northfield, when it's peak energy and peak prices, they dump their water out onto the power grid, but they also divert it at the Turners Falls Dam into the Turners Falls Power Canal for a second hit of peak energy, right? Okay. And that leaves the critical spawning habitat of the Connecticut River short-nosed sturgeon, and has for the last 5 seasons since their license expired, just basically devoid of the water they need to successfully spawn. They chase the fish out of there. So that's your Endangered Species Act. But the river is actually literally sucked backward at times. It does not. It has not met clean water standards since it began operations. But none of the federal agencies, and there is no watchdog on the river. Nobody ever pressed the issue. And now we have a foreign venture capital organization with plenty of big bucks that is handing out a lot of quiet money, and they got everybody to sign confidentiality agreements, and there's all this secrecy going on. And which means that after 50 years, we should be restoring this ecosystem, right? This ecosystem is literally broken at Northfield. In 3 states, it affects Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. We are eating the fish that are the public's ecosystem. That's your great-grandchildren's ecosystem. You get one chance in a century to make this right. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, hi, Wendy Weber, National Marine Fisheries Service, hi, Mike Pentney, Mass Division of Fish and Wildlife, hi, Mark Tiza, and let me see, who did I leave out? Mass Division of Environmental Protection, that's Martin Suberg. Where are you? They're about to sign another 50 years of this machine being able to operate. And it is a net loss power machine that is run essentially right now today. I looked, it's being run on 67% climate scorching natural gas.
So it's not even green energy.
It's not hydro.
Because they call it hydro to make it, I mean, it sounds, oh, it's hydro. Who's not in favor of hydro? But it's not even hydro.
They like to put the term hydro at the end of what they have to say about it, but I recently sort of compared it to a Roadrunner. It's a bad Roadrunner cartoon, right? You have an anvil, right, mm-hmm. that you want, so they only care about the river as a weight.
Okay.
They don't care about the fish.
Right.
If they did, the day the license expired, they would have put water in for a U.S. federally endangered species, right? They want the weight of that water. So as a bad Roadrunner cartoon, okay, Roadrunner would want to take the anvil and mm-hmm. pull it up, right? So he'd have to use the power grid as a parasite, right? He'd pull it up as a power. In this case, a living river becomes the anvil, and it gets turned back to us as a dead river. That literally, and this is according to First Light's own diagrams in this relicensing process, and you know I've been a stakeholder in this since day one,
right? And
have taken them to task in Washington. Literally, we know at least 3 miles of that river, when they're sucking it up at 15,000 cubic feet per second, runs backwards. That's where the diagram ends. So that's from where Northfield is, down under the French King Bridge, past the French King Rock, all the way down to Turners Falls Airport Industrial Park. And that's where the graphic ended, because they only had to do 5 kilometers. And then the other part is, when they spew the water back out under certain circumstances, it actually pushes the water back in the opposite direction, north of Northfield, back towards Vermont and New Hampshire. And they claim they have no erosional impacts on the river. And the only thing that they want to, the only thing they want to do to protect fish, I have a little piece of net that a woman named Susan Olmsted brought. They want to put a temporary net in from August 1st to November that might keep out some of the adult fish, but the juveniles that are supposed to be the American shad that are supposed to be the future, right? These future generations. And first they want to do 3/4 of an inch. So it's not even a permanent thing. They want to put it in every year, like this net, right? Mm-hmm. Not even permanently anchored. Then they brought it down to a 1/2 inch. Well, in about a month and a half, they're going to dewater the Turners Falls Power Canal. I usually go out there and I take pictures of it. These fish are that big.
Right.
These fish are that big. All summer long this year, only 23,000 American shad made it above the crappie fish lifts at Turners Falls. But they can produce a whole lot of, like, hundreds of thousands of eggs and larvae and juvenile young. Northfield has been eating them as they come downriver or as the eggs were laid. I mean,
these people that you're referring to,
yes,
that you just called out,
yes,
aren't they aware of all this?
They should. This thing should have been clapped. Everybody knew that this relicensing was coming for the last 2 decades. You know,
but these are professionals that are supposed to be. They're the professionals
public
that our
trust.
Taxpayer dollars go to support our river.
They are the people entrusted with the future of an ecosystem, and this is an ecosystem that is the center of the S.O. Conti National Fish and Wildlife Refuge, right?
Right.
There's only 2, I believe, in the entire country that have fish in their names, and there are about 500 refuges, and we have not done a thing to protect the fish in the Connecticut River. It's also a national blueway. How can you call anything that runs in reverse, even a river, even a waterway? And how can you call that mess below Turners Falls Dam, which they still, in First Light's license proposal, they're going to keep that gorgeous, should be full of life chasm with a little bit of spit, like 275 cubic feet of water coming down there from November. No, it's even earlier than that. It's like from July. It's just a horrible. There's no river. We don't have a living river in Massachusetts, and we have owed it to the kids in the future, but we've owed it to Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts here. The Connecticut River is essentially a entity on life support. I took a walk up there to the upper reservoir just yesterday, Drew, just to sort of, it is essentially an electric toilet. It runs off the power grid.
Right.
It runs off ISO New England, who has failed us in so many ways about telling us about the profligate use of energy. And Northfield Mountain, at times during this past July, was running off the power grid 73% natural gas to do all this stuff. And I want to give people, I sent Drew an email, and I'm hoping he can put these things out there. But if you want to know what the river is doing, what ISO New England is doing, there's something you can do. Just type in ISO New England real time, and you will come to these pie charts, which will tell you up to the minute how much natural gas, how much nuclear power is on there. We maybe 6% of our energy is renewable, actually renewable. And there's about 6% hydro in there. You know where the hydro is coming from? It's not Turners Falls. It's a little tiny plant. Turners Falls Power Canal might be able, and this is not even renewable hydro. Its impacts are so deep. It might be able to power most of Franklin County if you had water coming down the river every year at the same rate. It's a tiny bit of energy. Most of it's coming from Canada. Most of it is imported gas. Most of our energy is imported. We live way outside of our means, and we're not being told. ISO New England is the equivalent to me of Exxon, of not being honest with future generations. And it's all hand in hand, because Eversource, who will soon be running, the biggest donor to the Connecticut River Watershed Council's annual Source to Sea cleanup, Eversource is Northeast Utilities, who built Northfield Mountain. Mm-hmm. When I walked up there, all the big poles say Eversource. That's all their equipment there. Eversource just got fined in Connecticut $1.8 million for basically sort of tripping customers into signing up for new natural gas stuff, for basically sort of pressuring them. $1.8 million, I think it was in June. The year before, they were for their natural gas interests. The year before, another $1.8 million for deceiving the Department of Public Utilities in Connecticut by saying that the company was going to pay for these for this new natural gas, and it was actually coming out of the customers' pockets. And Northeast Utilities, doing business as Eversource and National Grid, basically are the friends of ISO New England. It's one big marketing effort. If you look up Eversource and subsidiaries, I counted 50 gas companies. Just look it up. Eversource subsidiary, there are 50. I don't know how many of them are natural gas. One of them is Aquarian Water, another sponsor of the Watershed Council Source to Sea Cleanup. Aquarian Water, private water company running public water systems, owned by Eversource. Now, if you were a bona fide river protection people, wouldn't you be saying there's no reason that private entities should have anything to do with public water?
You would think.
It's just been a horrendous show, Drew, and there's been some new interest. People showed up from Extinction Rebellion, and people. I'm hoping that you can put a link into people at an Honoring the Land event in Turners Falls that I spoke at recently. In 2 hours, they signed a petition to shut down Northfield Mountain. 57 people 19 different communities up and down this valley from 3 different states. This machine is deadly. It is wrong, and all these entities have failed. And they can walk away from this agreement now. They don't have to sign up. They can still walk out, but they're getting big time pressure. And FERC is all part of this. It's sort of, we don't have a policy that sort of protects rivers. Ecosystems, to me, you save the river before you worry about how you're going to run your cell phone or your electric car or your casino or Bitcoin or cryptocurrency.
Right. Well, the reason for the Northfield Mountain Storage Facility originally was because there was excess nuclear power and they needed to use it, right? And so while that plant is offline, it's been decommissioned for a while now. So the original purpose for it doesn't even exist anymore.
8 years ago, and nuclear power was all about excess. Right. What are we going to do with this? Well, why don't we blast the top of this mountain off and suck the river backwards and never have to pay a cent? First Light, for a 50-year license they're applying for, they expect to spend $130 million across 50 years. We got 1 year of sort of information about how much money they made off of Northfield. It was for 2019, $159 million. Okay. Meanwhile, they're giving out these little silly grants. They gave money to build a brick pizza oven over at Franklin County Tech. They gave money to Nullambika. They gave them a lot of money, $50,000, so you can have Robin Kimmer here. But was there no other way to do that? I mean, First Light's money buys silence. It buys, at the same time, it buys publicity and profits. It's this ugly sort of, and they're quietly moving money around. But in the meantime, they've probably spent hundreds of millions joining a consortium of New York system operators. In the New York Bight investment in wind power, they bought up 2 plants on the Allegheny River in Pennsylvania. This river is going to be sold out of market. Remember when we stopped the Connecticut River from being moved over to Boston back in the 1980s? They were going to use Connecticut River water to use for water. Well, people actually stopped that. This is a wholesale sellout. Right. And these are our federal and state agencies that are doing that. Right?
Now, it does seem, though, that you're having more support from people that are speaking up.
Yeah.
So is that having any traction, or it just doesn't matter to the fat cats at this point? They're just going to do what they do.
To be honest with you, I think it is holding up what should have been done. They wanted to get this license clapped up, and all of a sudden, the federal agencies are maybe having a few second thoughts about. They've already signed an agreement in principle, right? And they want it, and they keep stringing it along. It's supposed to. FERC keeps giving them extra time. It's almost 2 years since the first time they promised FERC they were going to do it. But people, there were a group from Extinction Rebellion that actually went under the fence and actually did the thing that I think, to me, it actually saved the soul of the river a little bit. They hung banners right over the ugly killer mouth of that thing, and they were willing to get arrested. It didn't happen that day, but they gave the river a little dignity. This is a watercourse that has no dignity, And I hear people there in other countries, rivers have actual rights. They're considered persons. Our river is considered a commodity, and we don't have a watchdog.
So where are our politicians? Doesn't Ed Markey have something to say, or Jim McGovern?
I think it's so far below their radar, and ISO New England and FERC are over there, and the only thing that I've seen our local politicians do, Andy Fisk, the Watershed Council's director, Natalie Blay, and Joe Comerford, about almost 2 years, a year and a half ago, last October. Was it only last October? They gathered up at Northfield Mountain, right next to the grimmest machine ever, right next to the suction mouth. And they paddled away in kayaks and did sort of a chamber of commerce. We're gonna have a future there's no sacrifice to be made. We're gonna base it on tourism and pretty scenery and kayaks and bring people here. Everybody had a chance to say this thing killed, particularly Dr. Fisk, who's claiming to be a watchdog of the Connecticut River. Nobody said a word. It's all about money. It's not about ecosystems, and in that way, it wholly disrespects the climate, the planet, and future generations.
So I think it was last year, I wrote a letter to FERC because I was told, oh, you have to get this letter in by X day. But it seems like the deadline has been passed on. So can people still be sending in letters?
They can, and I sent you some stuff that will tell you how to do this. I'm hoping you can include it in your blog. I mean, at the end,
Right.
in the role that happens at the end of it. But basically, what you have to remember, and we did this again, but this is a foreign capital organization that's basically running the show, and FERC is just sort of waving them through, right? So that's why the deadline keeps getting extended. You go to FERC.gov, and you go to Documents and Filings, but you have to remember this if you want to comment on this. P-2485, capital P-2485 is the FERC docket number. You have to include that. Then you follow the instructions. You go to hydro licensing, and then you can add your comments in there. As I said, there's a petition out there that just was a slam dunk saying this thing doesn't meet clean water standards, hasn't met them in the entire 50 years it's been running. It hasn't met the finding in Holyoke Company versus Lyman from 1872, 150 years later. It is still a threat to migratory fish day in and day out, regardless of whether they put a net in front of that thing or not, this little window dressing.
I just can't imagine that there isn't a lawyer, an environmental lawyer.
Please, Drew. Yes, please. Well, people think that there's a watchdog on the Connecticut River, and the Connecticut River Watershed Council just filed a comment with FERC saying that, how did they put it? We have concerns about the 401 water quality certificate, which is basically the Clean Water Act. They've known about this since I quit in 2010 there. I worked with them twice and walked out the door. I also worked up at Northfield and was on the safety committee for a time. They had concerns about them issuing a ready for environmental assessment. They've known about this for decades. If you're a watchdog, you don't state your concerns, and you don't state that we've been urging DEP to take on to do the study for whether this passes the Clean Water Act. You go to court.
Right.
You get an injunction.
Right.
You go to court against First Light, or you go to court against the EPA, or you go to court against the Massachusetts DEP, and you have an injunction in hand, and then you file that as part of the FERC process, and it's on the record. You don't say, oh, we want you to hurry up before all the big dogs sign off on this, and it's a done deal. We don't have a watchdog. You're right. Come on, Lord, bring us a lawyer. Drop down in the middle of this and save a river. You do not throw rivers and ecosystems away in the face of climate change. You don't run them backwards on climate fracking gas. And you put ISO New England right in the middle of this and say, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And what has FERC been doing? They've been selling generations out. They're as guilty as Exxon and any of the big corporations. They just are. They're a marketing. They take their marching orders from the big corporations, National Grid, Eversource, and now you got this big investment firm, right? Mm-hmm. So we had Citizens United. Corporations are people. Money
Right.
talks.
Money
But
is free speech.
how can you tell me this? How can a foreign corporation be in charge of a river that's a national fish and wildlife refuge, and can make the only federally endangered species on the Connecticut River unable to spawn for 5 seasons? You telling me anybody's doing their job here?
Well, that seems to be what you're suggesting, is that they're not doing their job. So how do we hold them to account? Or how are they held to account?
Well, this is it. We're talking about people standing up, going on the record. As I said, I'm hoping you can add stuff to the roll at the end of this.
Right, closing credits.
You write to the papers, you take action. Well, people took some action. People took notice when those people crawled under the fence there. Mm-hmm. You write to the papers, you write to every politician, but you write to the department heads and you say, this shall not stand. I mean, like I said, 57 people call for this thing to be shut down, and you get a court case. I mean, that's really the bottom line, Drew. I mean, that's really it. You got the court of public opinion, and you have the legal courts. But if nobody is willing to step up and challenge this, It doesn't do a lot. But you can indict a ham sandwich. This thing never ever passed the Clean Water Act. It's not a river.
So how much does it cost to get a lawyer? I mean, how many people need
What
to...
do you got? Let's see. Yeah, I got a few
$20
dollars. I got about
on
15 bucks.
Right. Well, the thing is, we're broke. But if there are a lot of people feel strongly about this, maybe rather than relying on some watchdog agency that isn't watchdogging, that we create something new and pool our resources.
That's what the hope is, Drew, that people are sort of starting to listen. I've been writing about the Connecticut River for 20 years.
And you have expanded your audience during that time.
Yeah.
You've reached more people.
Yeah. And I'm sort of the person that knows it from the inside.
Well, for one thing, you are an intervener.
Yeah.
But you didn't sign off on the non-disclosure agreement.
No, that's the reason I've been flapping my gums as best I could for all this time.
Now, I don't understand this whole non-disclosure agreement in the first place. Why should you agree not to disclose?
It's kind of like the wizard in The Wizard of Oz. Then we'd find out what's going on in the background, right? It's a two-track. You can do it as a two-track process, right? And the power companies and the agencies that are supposedly the public trust agencies protecting our river and fish, everybody says, well, we want certainty, so we'll try to hack out a side agreement with the power company, or you let FERC decide on all the issues. FERC would have to decide on the Clean Water Act and the Holyoke Company versus Lyman or whatever, and everybody supposedly wants certainty. But then you're faced with a mega corporation that comes in last minute, takes over after you've been negotiating with a different company for the past 5 years, and in the dark of night, they re-register the thing out of state.
And that's another issue. Why was that even allowed? That sounds highly improper.
I tried to intervene on that. I intervened literally on the basis of them not coordinating flow releases between Northfield Mountain and Turner's Falls Dam and Cabot Station, which dewaters the critical spawning habitat of the rock. Yeah,
right.
And that has been in the original license. That's still in place.
But they don't follow it.
And I had evidence. I had Micah Kiefer from USGS right there. The Conti lab had found 48 sturgeon there 3 days before, and then all of a sudden Northfield cut the water off. And I said, you have failed in...
Each one of those dead sturgeon is a major fine, isn't it?
I think it used to be $50,000, right? So if
of course, that's a drop in the bucket,
yeah,
right?
Well, I suppose so. But 48 times 50 G is quite a bit.
It does add up.
So
the shareholders may not like that.
A billion here, a billion there.
Carl, we've reached the end of another scintillating episode of Local Bias, talking about the Connecticut River. This is up to people to make a difference.
Drew, it's always a pleasure. I hope people will look for the information at the bottom of the roll when they see this, and take some action.
Right.
I mean, that's it. I mean, and if you're a lawyer, please drop a dime on somebody. All we need is to be on the books. That's all you need to have this on the books, so that you have some hope of retrieving a river system for generations to come.
Very good. Well, thank you for coming on again. Thank you for joining us on Local Bias. This is a chance for, of course, the viewer to decide what's important to them and to realize that you have agency. You can write a letter, you can make a phone call, you can make a difference. Thank you for joining us. Take care.